Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. As you can see, I'll be using a different color palette than my usual one for this video. The last few years, I've been working with a mostly bright and colorful palette in my art practice. After my last video where I created high contrast collages using dark muted colors, I thought it'd be a good exercise to continue to explore this color palette. I like having contrast in my collages, so I pull light to mid-tone papers that are muted and earthy as well. So let's give this a go. I pulled papers in browns, purples, and celadon for this first collage. I have more papers than I will use because I like to have options. I'll be working in this art journal made with a repurposed book cover and 60-pound paper. I brought out Blake's matte acrylic paint and amethyst to paint part of the ground. The painted ground will be considered a mid-tone value element. Other supplies are a glue stick and scissors that I'll be using for all of the collages in this video. Before I start painting, I like to put a piece of paper behind the page I'm working on and the previous page, just to protect the other pages in the art journal. I'll be painting the ground with this Princeton Velvet Touch 3/4 inch brush. I decided to mark a line halfway on the page where I want to put the paint. I'm only going to paint on the lower half. My design idea is to collage mostly on the top half of the page with some of the papers trailing into the lower half. My plan is to tear most of the paper elements. This brown monoprinted paper is a good initial element to place on the substrate. It helps me to focus on using dark value papers. I won't be gluing this paper down yet because I want to have other elements under it. Also want to make sure of the paper placement so the collage is balanced with different sizes and colors, especially since this collage will be dark in value. By the way, this dark purple paper is a monoprinted book page. I really like the expressive marks on it. I like to hold paper that I'm considering adding next to the existing papers. It helps to see if it will work before cutting or tearing it. The circle paper is too close in value to the existing purple paper, so I decided on this mid-tone purple plaid instead. At this point, I need to change the size and the shape of the elements. A reminder that varying the size and shapes of elements helps the collage to be successful. I like the size and placement of these two purple papers, so I decided to glue them both to the substrate. Now it's time to bring in another brown paper, but one that is light to mid-tone. I would consider this plaid paper light in value. It's similar size to the dark brown paper. Placing it slightly higher causes it to be visually different. That's why I stress placement of elements as well as using different sizes and shapes. I chose celadon as the other color because it harmonizes and contrasts with the purple and brown, meaning it works well with the other colors but is different enough that it stands out. I don't want these elements trailing into the painted section, so the sizes are similar. Again, I'm being mindful of the placement and having a slightly different shape. All of the elements under the brown paper are selected so I can start to glue. I'll be working on smaller accent papers and deciding on the shapes of the papers that will trail into the painted area next. I chose to use this purple plaid to tie in with the one in the upper right. The size will be smaller since it will be an accent paper. This next paper is tissue paper. I used it to wipe off a brayer when I was monoprinting. You can get some interesting color ephemera when wiping off a brayer. Since the paper is thin, it adds a different texture and look to the collage. Also, since it's the same color as the painted area, I'm starting to tie in the top half of the collage to the lower half. Next, I'm adding a celadon element to the top of the collage. Again, I'm working on adding balance. Also, I'm adding a different shape. Now it's time to address tying the painted ground to the top half of the collage. So far there's only one dark brown element, so I'm going to start by using this dark brown paper. Additionally, I want to add another element with a completely different shape. A long narrow paper is a good element to tie the two areas together, along with being a different shape. I'm bringing back out this circle paper for 3 reasons. 1, I love the pattern. 2, it's a dark value. And 3, it's purple, which is needed in this area to tie in with the purple above. I'm making it wider than the brown element to add variety. Another brown element is needed. This paper is the same as the larger element above, so it'll tie the two together. This area looked a bit too light to me, so by adding a small dark purple element will fix it. Sometimes just adding a small amount of color will solve a visual problem. This area looked like it needed a smaller accent paper. Instead of adding a celadon element that will be too close in value to the ground, I decided to add a dark brown element. This will help the collage to look mostly dark in value, which is the goal. Here's the finished collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out. I love the colors, the composition, the torn edge elements. It has inspired me to continue using torn elements in the next collages, so let's continue on. Here are the papers for this next collage. The color palette contains grays, blacks, and blues. Again, I pulled more papers than I will use. I'll be painting an ombre ground using Blick's matte acrylic paint in sage blue and paper artsy elephant. Both colors are mid-tone in value. I'm using the same brush that I used for the previous collage. I'm comfortable using only one brush when painting an ombre. If you are not, I would suggest using at least 2, 1 for each color, or 3, 1 for each color and 1 to blend where the 2 colors meet. I will talk more about the design next, but I want to mention that I am aware that most of the ground may be covered once I start collaging. Knowing what composition I'll be using, I'd rather have the whole page painted. It allows me to put the elements where I want without concern that some of the unpainted ground will show through. Now that the ground is painted, let's talk about the composition. I don't create many vertical composition collages, so that's what this collage will be. It can be challenging for me to create a vertical or a horizontal composition that is interesting to look at. I believe that using torn edge papers will help. This black paper was monoprinted on a book page. I love the jagged edge that was caused when I tore it out of the book. Again, I'm starting with a dark value paper to keep me on task. With this vertical collage, I'm being mindful of using various lengths and widths. Not all of the elements will be the length of the substrate. Besides having a good pattern, this paper has a good variation of color, mostly blue with some black. I placed this paper so there's space in between itself and the black paper, so there's room to add another shorter element. This placement technique is a good way to remind yourself to add a variety of papers with different lengths and widths. Before I address the space in between the glued papers, I want to add another black paper. This one isn't as dark looking as the existing one. I would consider it mid-tone in value. And as you can see, it's shorter than the other papers. I would consider this paper more of a light value. Again, this element is sized down from the others. Also, it's not placed at the same level, top or bottom, as the other papers. This helps with creating a good composition. This gray paper is another light value. It's going to cover most of the torn edge of the black paper that I like, but that's okay. I don't get too attracted to things like that when I'm collaging. I prefer that the collage looks good overall, even if I need to cover up a section I like. Also, you can see the ombre ground is getting covered as well. Since I want this collage to be mostly dark looking, I'm bringing in this dark blue scrap to glue on top of the gray element. Adding this thin accent paper will help keep the collage looking dark overall. At this point, I'm adding thinner and shorter accent papers. The camera stopped filming at this point when I added the gray element on the right side. It's the right amount of light value. It helps the blue and black papers underneath be seen as 2 separate elements. And finally, one more dark value accent paper to separate the 2 blue elements. Here's the finished collage. I'm very happy with this one as well. Let's go on to the final collage. I have to admit that I overdid it when pulling these papers. I pulled too many. It's just that I'm feeling very inspired by this darker muted color palette. This collage won't have a painted ground. It'll be an all-over composition, so let's jump right into it. First thing, I want to mark a line 3/4 inch from the journal's gutter. I will collage to that line. If I collage against the gutter, the papers can bend or wrinkle. I like both burgundy circle papers. This one is a bit brighter, but still reads as a dark value. Let's see if I regret this decision. I'm thinking this element will be a subtle focal point in a way. I usually don't have focal points in my collages, but I do like to have some elements highlighted. Once again, I'm not going to glue this element right away. I want to decide on the surrounding papers first. I love the variation of color in this section of the paper. It has mostly yellow oxide, but there's some dark green as well. It's another monoprinted book page. I tore it a bit while it was under the burgundy element to make sure the size would be correct. Next, I want a dark green element to balance this area of the collage. Yet another monoprinted book page. Even though the original book page is showing, I consider it a dark value paper. Continuing to add color papers that will balance the collage, I consider this green plaid paper as mid-tone. Also, it's time to add a different shape. This long shape fits perfectly along the right side. I'm not going to glue it yet. I'm not sure if I want it to overlap the paper that I'll put below it. I'll come back to it. First, I want to address the other side of the burgundy element. Another green element fits into this space. This mostly solid color has a slight ghost print, which I love. I cut part of this paper with scissors that I know will be hidden. There isn't a need to tear it. Another yellow element is needed. I don't want to add a large shape. It will steer the collage into a lighter direction, which I don't want. By the way, this is another ghost print. I don't want the circle paper to be the only burgundy element. By adding small accent elements in this color adds to the design of the collage without taking away from the main burgundy element. This paper is another ghost print. It may have been the third pull, but I'm not sure. It has a good variation of color and texture. I'm being mindful about the size so it won't cover too much of the yellow element next to it. Now it's finally time to glue down the green plaid paper. This burgundy paper is muted enough to not compete with the burgundy circle paper. It reads as mid-tone. Again, I'm being mindful to tear a shape that is the right size to be impactful, but not too big to cover too much of the yellow element. To address the blank space under the yellow element, a small accent of dark green works well in this area. Instead of introducing a new dark green paper, using a scrap of the existing paper ties the two elements together. The placement of both papers helps to balance the collage. With all the elements in place, now it's time to glue down the burgundy circle paper. This collage isn't quite done. My eye went to the upper left area. It's missing a small accent of burgundy. This collage needs another elongated element as well, but narrow enough to fit in this area without taking away too much space from the other papers. This light burgundy, which reads as fuchsia, monoprinted paper is just the right shade of mid-tone, so it fits in with the other colors of the collage. Now it's finished. I'm very happy with this collage as well. Let's do a quick wrap-up in the next section. I like that this collage doesn't have a traditional composition such as a cruciform. The placement of the elements is balanced and cohesive. I like the contrast between the solid ground and the pattern papers. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Even though I collaged on top of most of the ground, I'm glad I painted an ombre. If nothing else, it's always good to practice painting one. As I mentioned, it's a challenge for me to create vertical compositions, but I think this one turned out successfully. I like that it's balanced without both sides being exactly the same, meaning the right side has larger, darker elements, and the left side has a mix of mid to dark elements, but the collage as a whole is balanced and cohesive. I'm happy with this collage as well. I'm glad this collage doesn't have a painted ground. It was good to switch it up. Also, this collage reminds me of the ones I created a few years ago, mostly torn edges with all over composition. I don't regret choosing this burgundy circle paper. I think it works well. The placement of the different colored papers helps the viewer's eye to move around this collage, especially the placement of the smaller burgundy and yellow papers. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm very happy with this collage session. I'm not going to abandon using bright colors, but I'd like to continue to explore this darker, muted color palette. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this collage session. I encourage you to keep on exploring in your art practice. It's exciting to see where it will lead you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. Please let me know if you have any questions. Take care.